Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Calm is Hot. My name is Jade. I'm your host. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And today we have a very special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Dr. Sarah Amira de la Garza. I'm at Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona, but I live in Phoenix. I go by my middle name, Amira, and my pronouns are she, her, and ella, if you speak Spanish. I am really pleased to be here and excited to be able to talk about some of my work and some of my ideas, and happy to share anything that you're interested in. I think I remember connecting with you when we were in Seattle at Western States Communication Association. I
Yeah.
saw some of your performance, and I think we just connected on the grounds of activism and speaking out.
Yeah. I am so deeply inspired by you and by your work, and so many who I know admire you and just love you and have this affinity for you and the work that you do and the person who you are. So, getting to have you on my little podcast is so exciting. So, thank
Well,
you.
thank you.
Yes. So, some of the work that you've done is on mindful heresy. And I have always been fascinated by this. When you post about it on social media, or when you talk about it, your experiences with it. And so I'm interested if you would share for us a little bit about what that is and what motivated you to research it and engage with it.
Yeah, I could tell you the story of how I came up with the idea. I mean, it's something that I actually thought about for many, many years, and then began, after maybe about almost 20 years, began to start sharing it and working with it more publicly. But about 30 years ago, I was working on a lot of projects related to activism in the community. I was working in many Native American communities with people in recovery and who were dealing with issues of recovery from generational trauma and physical and sexual violence, the repercussions of alcoholism and drug abuse. And and I was in the context of Arizona when lots of laws and things were trying to be passed against immigration and all kinds of things that were happening. And I remember writing in my journal one time that I felt that people were held back by politeness and trying to not offend people. And what I was writing was that if we're ever going to really have any significant change in the areas of misogyny and gender and race discrimination and violence that's habituated in our societies, we're going to have to get to a place where we quit worrying about upsetting. And I continued to write because I really feel that people who identify themselves as being nice and polite and courteous can wind up being trapped socially when something really calls for radical change. And so I just wrote across this piece of paper a cry for heresy. And it was basically a cry for people to be willing to break the rules, to violate things that people considered sacred traditions that were no longer serving or perhaps had never served, but were oppressive and had just become very common. It was pretty liberating for me just to write that because I think it energized me and gave me the ability to distance and detach myself from those kinds of discomfort that I actually think are the sign that we are changing, because I think some discomfort is needed if we're breaking from societal norms. Uh, that's the discomfort of growth, as opposed to a discomfort that comes from being oppressed. So I kind of kept that to myself and used it as a personal motivational mantra in a way, that I am a mindful heretic. And I actually spent quite a bit of time then studying heresy and going to sites where the Inquisition had been very powerful, learning about the Spanish Inquisition, reading historians and literary figures, religious figures that wrote a lot about that. And eventually I shared the idea publicly and was really surprised because it was at a Western States communication convention. And they gave me a slot, the last slot on the last day in the late afternoon, which, if you've ever been to a convention, you know that nobody comes to those sessions because people are already leaving town, et cetera, et cetera. But it was packed. And I had a panel of former students and students that I'd been collaborating with that were familiar with the idea. And that for several months before the convention, we'd been chatting about it. And we all just talked about the idea of what mindful heresy was. And so I think I'll tell you all what it basically is, the way I've come to define it. And it's basically when someone is very closely connected to membership in a group or a culture, an organization, something that means a lot to them, maybe even the human race, where we feel really identified and we feel that we have a right to be present. But there's something about the rules, the traditions, the orthodoxy, the things that are considered normal, that it's just impossible to be silent about the fact that it violates something integral to who I am, or what I believe is ethical and just in society. And so the mindful heretic says, I'm not going anywhere. I still am a part of this group. I believe in it, but I'm not going to do what you think everyone has to do. And then at that point, that conscious decision to violate the particular rule in order to maintain your integrity is the mindful heresy. And then as I've taught this a couple of times in a graduate class and written about it, I've started to come up with ideas and awareness of what it takes to live a life as a mindful heretic, and what it is and what it isn't, what it's similar to, but what makes it distinct. I don't know if you've got some questions, because I'm talking out of my head a lot.
I have so many questions. This is so rich and there's so much here. Firstly, do you identify as a mindful heretic?
Absolutely. I think that's partly um, why the work is important to me, because I have found it to be an incredible source of strength to see a violation of a group's rules as not having the power for others to tell me that I don't belong where I have no intention of leaving.
Wow. Wow. Now, you mentioned a distinction between like what is and what isn't. Can you unpack that a little?
Yeah, sometimes the idea is really appealing to people who are just by nature rebellious, but it's not simple rebellion. It's an Because usually people who are very rebellious are also very unhappy with their, well, not unhappy, but they seem surprised that when they rebel, that there are repercussions and that there's backlash. That's why the word mindful in this is really important, because it's not mindful as in calming yourself down and going into a meditation trance. It's mindful in the sense that you are willing to be aware and not lie to yourself about the nature of what you're doing. And if we're violating things that are considered really sacred or traditional to a group or a society, then if we're intelligent and have our eyes open, it makes absolute sense that there's going to be backlash and there's going to be people who are going to be angry or people who are going to call us names and ostracize us and try to do things to bully, maybe make our lives unpleasant in order to try to stop us from having our rule breaking stop. They don't want the attention to it. So the very first thing is that a mindful heretic is not swayed by their own discomfort. My discomfort is not a sign that I should stop violating the rules. It's a sign that it's actually having an impact. It's the same thing I've often said, like, if you are claiming to be an activist and there's no backlash in your life, are you really an activist? If you're protesting and no one is saying that there's a problem with what you're doing, are you really reaching the people that need to hear the protest? Those kinds of things. The it's almost like the heartbeat of a society or a group that perhaps has been lulled into a sort of sleep because something is traditional, and the heresy should wake up something in them to realize that something is happening. Because another thing about a mindful heretic is that you are attempting to model how satisfying a life can be when you are living according to different rules. So we insist on being present, and we insist on living according to the rules that keep us centered and make us capable of being good good members of the world, because it's not anarchy. We're not leaving the world. We're not leaving society. We're claiming that we should all be able to work and live together. And there are certain rules that actually make it really impossible for there to be an ecological interdependent way for us to to function. So so the mindful heretic says, I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to do what is meaningful to me. And I want you to see what I'm doing. I want you to hear what I'm doing. And it can be as small, because it 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 applies to all rules. And it can be as small as the way you dress, the way you talk, to rules that are held in your employment or in society about who we should be, how we should be, what you can and can't say. Because historically, when people would do things that were considered heretical, they were killed. They're punished, imprisoned for doing those things.
Sometimes they still
And
are today.
yeah, yeah. And and I think it when I first started doing this work and started sharing it, it was before the onslaught of a lot of the kind of QAnon sort of stuff that's going on in our society, where people are claiming and believing things that are factually unbased. And and that is one area where politeness and the idea that we should hear all positions is kind of the orthodox way to be polite, and civil is the word that they use. But my mindfully heretical thing is like, I really don't think I need to respect something that is completely untrue. That's actually kind of insane, but it's considered polite. And polite, is related etymologically to political and politic. So when we're being polite, we're we're acting in a way to try to make things work, but according to particular values and according to particular traditions. So if you say, well, I'm not going to do that, then I've had people say things, well, then why don't you just leave? Or why are you here if you don't like what people are saying? And I say, well, I'm here because I feel that I'm a part of this group and I feel the conversation should be taking place, and not because I think that I have to I have to violate things that I think keep me balanced and integrated as a human being.
Wow. One of my questions, I've got so many questions now.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
One of them is taking us just a little bit back. I'm interested to know how you merged your kind of who you are. I believe in like spirits and energy and just like who you are, how you kind of gravitated to performance studies and kind of using specifically this field to really explore and unpack what it means to be mindful heretic and kind of merge who you are, how you exist in the world, your spirit, your energy, and how that interacts with like all these larger systems and that's a big question. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've been doing forms of performance work since I was in high school, but I think that what I'm doing now is very different from what I originally was doing. When we teach performance studies and we take classes in performance studies, we encourage people expressing themselves, finding pieces of literature or writing pieces that they perform that express something that they have to say. And the same kind of politeness norm can prevent performance from doing radical reality shaping work, because sometimes we feel we must always say, oh, that was really good, or that was great and you did a good job. And and we oftentimes uh, don't don't seek critique of our work or listen to the criticism that comes for our work. Is if we don't have any criticism, then we really aren't being encouraged to reflect on the basis of how other people are seeing our work. Sometimes criticism will let me know that I'm doing exactly what I'm wanting to do, because the criticism might actually be upset or questioning why, how can you dare do that? I remember when I have a performance, it's called Maria Speaks, that I did for several years and traveled around and performed it in various locations. Um, and it has to do with my identity as a Chicana woman, and how my ancestry as a woman of Mexican ancestry and indigenous ancestry from Mexico that has a lot of Catholicism in it. How how do I deal with being present today and with spirituality today? And when I would do the performance, I had a number of times where somebody told me, "Well, I hope you never take this to Mexico because somebody will shoot you." And and the and the idea is because I dared in one scene to to yell in anger at an image of the Virgin Mary. And it's an image of the Virgin Mary that has the Sacred Heart here that has thorns in it. And she's holding a flower and she's looking really peaceful. And what I'm yelling to her is, how can you have such a peaceful expression when you're in such incredible pain? You need to teach us how to scream when we're in pain. You need to show us that it's agony to suffer, not to silence our pain, not to pretend that everything is beautiful while the thorns are digging into our hearts. At the same time, other people were saying, oh my God, that meant so much to me. I could really connect with you. And then there were a lot of women from Ireland who had grown up in the same kind of historical relationship with Catholicism in Ireland. And some of you might know about the Magdalene laundries and the abuses that happened within Ireland, who said that they really connected with it because they felt the same way. The mindful heresy in performance is the is actually the willingness to say and do what people would say, oh no, you shouldn't do that or you shouldn't say that, but taking advantage of the stage as a place that allows you to perform what you what you think is possible, and maybe even exaggeratedly so because you have the stage, but to really make a claim about what we need to get out there, what needs to be expressed. And I think so that when we're performing and rehearsing, if we've learned the rules of the society, we will feel the discomfort because there's something in us that's telling us I shouldn't do this, or I shouldn't wear this, I shouldn't say that, or I should not wear this. There's like all kinds of things. And that to me is the sign that we're undoing the the tightness in the way we've been wound. Like when you go out and work out at the gym, one of the signs that it's working is that it hurts. That you wake up the next day and you're like, oh, God, I can't move, because the body is learning to be different. The muscles are learning to grow, to heal, because they tear and heal, right? They tear and heal. So I think the same thing happens with our belief structures, is those limiting ones need to tear, and then we need to heal into a new place.
I love that. That's such a powerful and good connecting a way to understand this. And I feel like some of the things that I got to engage with in grad school was a lot of activism through performance to disrupt. And I'm going to use your word, kind of tear away at systems, systemic oppression, and some really like meta issues. And I I feel like this type of work and the opportunity to even be able to have it is so necessary. Would you like to share a little bit more about how it has for you over the years? Because you're also an academic and also doing activist work through performance, how it's kind of evolved over the years.
Yeah, I think one of them is the key part where I talked about how if you're a mindful heretic, you're claiming I'm going to stay here. I'm still part of this. I'm still part of this family. I'm still a part of this field. I'm still a part of this society. Still a part of this ethnic group. Still a part of my friend group. And the key question that I would ask myself as I was thinking about this was, so if I'm not doing the things that have been traditionally held, what are the things I'm doing that demonstrate that I'm still part of this? And so what's important there is then to realize, what am I giving? So oftentimes when we're protesting and rebelling against something, we we surrender to a kind of a black white binary. I'm either of you or not of you. And I think that can hurt us, because there's got to be a place where I could say, okay, so I'm claiming I'm still part of this field, but I'm not going to do this kind of work. And I'm claiming I want to, I'm gonna go up for promotion. I want to do all this. Well, then what am I doing? If I'm not doing the things that I didn't want to do, then what am I doing that demonstrate that I have a commitment to this field? And so it requires some real interrogation of what's meaningful and what can I give. Uh, and that, again, it's not necessarily pleasant, because there is, as human beings, we want to connect. I really think human beings want to connect. But when there are really big issues or beliefs or practices that that are distinct from what others hold, and they mean a lot to us, the the pain is a sign that the person really does mean something to us, or the organization really does mean something to us. But it's not necessarily a sign that I have to give up what's real to me. And so one of the things I've been working with some of my grad students over the last year or so, because I teach a graduate class called Questioning the Body, is the exploration of how fear and discomfort that we need to, and dissonance, cognitive dissonance, all these kinds of things, that we need to begin to have a relationship with them that doesn't see them as our enemy, that sees them as the true signs of change happening. And I actually read something by a man by the name of Thomas Cahill, who wrote about heretics. And one of his chapters had something at the very beginning that basically said that because he looked at heresy throughout history and how societies changed. And what he said was heresy is a dress rehearsal for a lasting change. So in other words, there were whole generations where people were willing to be heretics and continued being heretics. And while they might have had all kinds of backlash and negative experience, it was their behavior and their public demonstration of what was possible that actually allowed change to eventually happen. So the fact that I might be experiencing discomfort in the process of activating a particular change is a sign that the society around me needs the change or might need the change, and people who are willing to perform different behaviors and different ways of being actually are it's the dress rehearsal. We're seeing what the actual show will be like once everybody learns their lines, that kind of thing. So that uh, I sometimes when people are creating performance pieces, they'll feel frightened or they'll feel a little insecure, and and they might be directed, well, maybe then you shouldn't do that. Why don't you just do something you're comfortable with? If it's not, I mean, there's a way that if it's so terrifying that it kind of paralyzes me and I know I can't do this right now, that's not what I'm encouraging people to do. But there is a certain level of discomfort that tells me I'm actually pushing at the boundaries. I'm pushing at the barriers. And when I used to work with the Native American organization in recovery, I did a workshop once that was called Tearing Down Sacred Boundaries. And so just putting up that we actually had like toothpicks in a everybody had like a big styrofoam board, and then they put toothpicks in it for all the different people that were in their lives, and then took rubber bands and connected them like where all the networks were. And then my question was, okay, now which of those boundaries that are there are keeping you drunk if they were in alcoholism? Which of those boundaries there are keeping you with someone who's battering you or abusing you? Which of these are keeping you closeted about your own self and who you are? Which of these are here? And how might you cut those? And so then you cut a rubber band that stretch, it pops. So it creates a little bit of a playful atmosphere in the exercise, but it creates the awareness that some of these things that we've held together, they might just have to go. And by doing it with the rubber bands, and having rubber bands popping, people are laughing, but they're also doing something that's representative of something very difficult in their lives. And so I think another part of that's really important for Mindful Heresy is that it's playful, that we need to find humor, and performance can help with that as well. Artwork, going to shows, just all kinds of things that can help us to rehearse the lines of this world that we insist is the world that we want to live in, rather than only talking about the difficulty of the world. I think we need to do that. And I think that's like some of the performances that I saw at Western the year that we met. The ones about eating and
Selena's.
yes, and the body image and all the food that was there, and playing with the food, and
Yeah.
it's not something you would necessarily do, if you went to a banquet or something like this. But the fact that we could do that, and that there was food on, well, they laid plastic sheets on the floor, so we didn't destroy the carpets and stuff. But the fact that you could take a cake and just do whatever you wanted to do with it. You could put it on your body. You could eat it any way you wanted or throw it,
It was magical.
Yeah, it's liberating, because if you're acting out what at a deep embodied level, you wish you could just say, I'm tired of acting like all this is perfect just the way it is.
Yeah.
you know?
It's
Uh,
that to me makes me I feel like there's a strong connection between and this word has come up multiple times, but the word pain,
yes.
that there's pain. And I use the word trauma a lot with my students and also pain, and how just hearing you speak to the power of performance and having experienced it myself, and just even you and I kind of reminiscing Angelina's performance with about the food and the cake. And I feel like there's so much potential to be explored for people through the playfulness that performance can offer if people are willing to go there.
Well, yeah. But I also think that the more that we perform and get involved in performance, the the more that our body knows that it's good for us,
Mm,
and so I tell people I'm constantly entertaining myself. So even if I'm not on the stage, I might be imagining what I think would be hilarious, uh like
I
it.
love that. I love
Yeah.
it.
And I think we learn that from performance. You're just like always having an idea. Like you might not actually stage it, but wouldn't it be hilarious if I could just get up there and do this?
I definitely had a few of those thoughts.
Well, there was a pattern that was happening where people in our department were calling the various Asian students by each other's names as if it didn't matter. And there we had another Chicana professor in our department, and they called her Amira, and they called me by her name repeatedly. And there is nothing about the way we looked that was similar. The only thing was that we were of the same race or the same ethnicity. And so I had some grad students that came to me. They were very uncomfortable because they were tired of being called by each other's names and having people say like, "Oh, I just get confused." It's as if it was not problematic because we weren't confusing all the white students' names. It's like if I just called everybody Mary and said, "Oh, well, you all just look the same to me." That it's very offensive, right? So we could have gone through the procedures of filing a grievance and going through all this, which is following the rules. Or we had a department performance thing that was coming up. And I said, well, how would you like to, maybe we'll create a performance about this. And so I created a performance with them that we called the Tolt Syndrome, TALTS syndrome. And that stands for they all look the same. The Tolt syndrome. And I put across on a slide projector, the Tolt syndrome. And I was presenting that as like it's a workshop. I was going to teach them about the syndrome that word had. It was passing through society, and that you too might have been afflicted by this. And the purpose of our workshop is to help you identify whether or not you have Tolt syndrome, and maybe you can get rid of Tolt syndrome. So then I had the students that came to me would come up, and I'd say, so here's the first thing. And one of the students would come and stand on one side of the stage. I said, is this one person? And then the other person would stand next to them, or two. Is this one person or two? And then I put images of the faculty members of the same ethnicities. Is this one person or two? Is it and you could see the faces in the audience getting, this is really uncomfortable. I don't like what's happening here. So I said, well, Tolt syndrome, they all look the same, it just goes through on and on. And then there were people in the audience, usually the people that had been uncomfortable observing this happen, or had it happen to them, who were just laughing their heads off. That's the mindful heresy, the humor part of it. And it was also a glaring representation of the reality of how ridiculous it is for them to say that they all look the same. Is this one voice or two? And then I took names or pictures of people in our field who were of the same ethnicity. Is this one person or two? Is this what? And
But it's like my jaw's been dropped. Like, oh my gosh, I feel like in many ways you are absolutely a mindful heretic. Oh my gosh. What so the feedback you provided, but so and the students actually participated and embodied it. And so it was almost as if there was a space there created, of course, like with their consent and their willingness to participate, where they could actually call attention to this in a disruptive way that was like non-normative to the policies and procedures. That must have felt if I can only imagine if that were me, I would have felt like good. Just the your description of this, I'm like, we should make this the new norm, the new
Right.
norm.
Right. Yeah. So it's liberating. There's a psychologist by the name of Gendlin, Gendlin, who writes about what he calls felt sense. And it's something in your body where you feel the truth.
Mm,
But it's like the first you kind of see it for the first time. And so you kind of realize like, oh, that's what I really want to do. You'll have, even if you look at food on a menu, your body tells you, like, you can look at it and you're like, no, no, no. And then you read one, you go, that's what I want. Okay. Or the same thing will happen where people are offering you jobs and opportunities and you're hearing them and hearing them. And then you hear one and something in your body goes, ooh, no, no. Your body just tells you. In the same way, when you perform these things that we're stuffing down because they're polite and normative, and as racist and sexist and habituated as they might be, we're stuffing them down and we're contradicting our body's wisdom, which is saying, no, you know, it when you do something that goes against what you know is true and real, there's a deadening feeling. And I really believe that over time, orthodoxy that violates human dignity and human integrity causes people to be in a sort of trance. And there's a guy by the name of Walensky who actually writes about this fact that people are living in trances, and that what we want to do is we want to wake out of those trances. And so one of the things that a lot of people have often said is that when you are hypnotized for hypnotherapy, that's the trance. And Walensky writes, actually, the trance is our everyday life. And when you actually begin to envision the other realities, that's when you're waking up. And so that you want to become aware of these what he says is their trances people live. You want to be aware of these, be aware of the trances that I've been living, and then pay attention to those felt sense experiences so that your body will protect you. Your body wants to do what's right for you, for your body, and it's not your ego. It's like wholeness. It's interconnected. And we might be changing and the body will say, I'm not ready for that. And then you can actually say, well, what am I ready for? So it's not always yes or no. It can be we're moving along the way. In Chicano spirituality practices, they call it nepantla, which is that we're constantly in a state of becoming. So you do not want to stop that motion. And I really believe that many forms of orthodoxy and politeness and habits cause us to be stuck because we just keep on doing things as they've been done. And it can be really destructive and harmful. So the idea is, well, I might not be able to do that, but what can I do so I'm still alive, so I'm still becoming?
yes.
So you've got, like, you're growing a plant and the plant is getting too big for its container. Do you uh do you bind the plant so it stops growing? No, because it'll kill it. We have to repot it or we have to trim it. So what the same thing in our lives. If this container of culture or gender or ethnicity or work or uh, health practices, or language, whatever it is, if this container is keeping me from growing, what what how can I repot myself? How can I what are the leaves that need to be trimmed? Do I splice myself and, and say, well, then I'll be this over here and I'll be this over here? Can we become heretical to the idea that there's only one way for us to be, and say, well, I don't, and people will say, well, that's not who I thought you were. It's a, well, apparently not. That's, so that's who it's not who I thought you thought I was, but it's who I am.
Well, I'm over here in my feels because I think this is so related to so many different people's experiences. And like, obviously, I'm trans, and there's just so, like, I've just been like soaking this all in. And I'm like, yep, yes, yes. I think there's so much to be said about when people make a conscious decision to push back or water the plant, even just seeing what it would be like to water the plant or nurture it, and then potentially see if, what could happen if they let it grow. And I think the main demographic that I work with is students who I think they're still like finding their voice and kind of figuring out where it's okay to push back or if it's okay to water their plants, and metaphorically, which I love. and
Right,
and
right.
also I'm wondering what might you, if you would like to, offer them in terms of just maybe a little reassurance from someone who, you're a mindful heretic and you know this very well. Maybe for someone who's like hearing this for the first time and may have some internal struggle.
I guess I think back to when I was in college, and actually it was through my performance work that I realized that part of the reason that I was uncomfortable with many things is because I wasn't familiar with them. The more that I allowed myself to think think about whether or not the life that I was living was actually feeding me, uh, and if it wasn't, that acknowledging that I had the ability to make choices that would. and and I think that the thing that performance did is that it gave me an ability to not stuff it down. So whether or not I was on a stage, I might write poetry, I might join, maybe go to a poetry reading where people are performing, hear people expressing things that are similar to mine. I mean, I think the most important thing is that a mindful heretic is not living in isolation. So so the mindful heretic is immersing themselves in social experience in order to be able to have some social validation. And I think that many times we when we silence ourselves, we're basically closeting ourselves and taking away the air, that we need to breathe as social beings. And taking to mind and to heart what Cahill said about these being dress rehearsals, which means that in a dress rehearsal, you do things the way you expect to do it on stage when the audience comes, but you still have the ability to change some things. So if in that dress rehearsal you realize, I don't think that's exactly how I want to do it, well, then you can still tweak it. You can still change it. And then realizing that even if we said we were going to be this particular way, or we said we didn't believe in this, if something changes, we're critically thinking human beings. We can take in data and evidence and change what we once said we believed. That's the most important thing, is that the very fact that I said this, I changed my name in 2002, and because I wanted to, because it was time to do that. And people would say, well, did you hate your family? I said, no, I just didn't, that name didn't fit me anymore. I had to have another name. And I did a performance about it. called The Courage to Change Your Own Name. And I started it by saying that the day that I had my court trial or the court hearing for changing my name, I walked in the courthouse. Everyone was in Halloween costumes because my court date was on Halloween. And that I changed the name, and then I had handouts with my old name and my new name, and I gave them to everybody in the audience. And these are people who had known me for many, many years, and they told me after this performance that had I just told them at a meeting or an email, that they might not have been able to have actually embraced it, but because they saw me perform it and involve them in it, they just started calling me by the new name. I think if we could be both serious and playful together, and both comfortable and hopeful at the same time that we're feeling pain and fear, that if we're capable of holding these tensions, we'll be really amazed at how strong we can get. In the same way that if you're practicing yoga, it's the ability to hold the tension that creates balance. The minute that and if you're actually paying attention to when you're holding balance, you can feel yourself moving in both directions. And you're trying to keep from going that way, and you just stay. And that's the balance. When we are in balance and when we're feeling strong, it's not that all tension has gone. It's that we've learned how to stay present in it.
My
And
gosh.
so it's a way of life. And I'm in the process right now of writing meditation. So I'm going to have 365 meditations of a mindful heretic, so that you could actually read one every day, and then just reflect on it. And I'll let you know when I'm done with that. I'm going to self-publish it, and hopefully people will want to read it, and it would be useful for them.
Absolutely. And as we come to a close, I was actually going to ask you if you have any upcoming projects or anything. Can I just ask what kind of motivated you to do the 365 days of this?
Well, I was doing something on Facebook where I was just going to do it for like a week, and then I thought, oh, but this is like really tapping into thing, and there were certain people who I could tell were coming in every day to read it. So later I did one that was 57 days, because there were 57 days until my birthday. So I did one and again, I noticed that there were people who were tuning in basically and reading it every time. And then one of them said, you need to put these into a book. I would definitely get a book like this. And so I thought, well, then why don't I just start writing that? And so I'm actually at about 100 right now, and I'm going to keep writing them until I've got them all, and then I'll put that together, because
Totally gonna
I think
buy this.
sure. Yeah. I'll give you one.
No, no,
Yeah,
hold
yeah, yeah.
on.
All
And then if it's okay, I can like share a few with my students and tell them to go buy it.
right. Yeah, I'll let you know when it's ready.
Yeah. Any other upcoming projects or performances? I know that you just got back from a conference.
Well, I'm working on a performance. It's actually a play. I asked a friend of mine to help co-write a script quite a while ago, but now it's become even more important given things that have been happening. And it's called the Banned Book Salon. And in it, all the characters are characters from books that have been banned, or the authors of books that were banned. And they're all invited to a salon where they're going to talk. And the image is that the first scene will be everyone arriving to the salon and talking and introducing themselves to each other. And you basically would recognize the characters. And then the second act would be the audience and the characters actually eating together. So there would be a table so that you could actually interact with the characters from the books. And then the second act would be over, go to the third act. And that would actually be more a serious consideration of the kinds of things that are involved when we begin to silence through banning of books and controlling what people can write and say. And I'm hoping to be able to maybe put that on stage next year. And my dream is to be able to do it in various places, because I think this is it's a fun idea, but it's a serious topic.
I want to bring you to San Francisco to do this.
I would love to do it in San Francisco. San Francisco is the kind of audience that would really love this too.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know for a fact there are more than a handful of people in our department who would totally be excited about this. So we have to stay in touch.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, this is so fun. I know that we went over a little bit, and I want to thank you so much for that, for honoring us with your wisdom and openness, your vulnerability, and just share my gratitude for you.
Oh,
So,
thank you. Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
It was really a lot of fun to talk to you. Thank you so much for being interested. And I hope we stay in touch.
Yes. I'll have to bring you back.
Yeah. Okay. All right.